Welcome, everybody, to the Great Witness, Kevin the Great Witness, the Adventure Series show, and this is with Kevin Smith from the UK, who's sharing his real side experiences. Some people call them dreams, but we've referred to them as real side experiences, and you'll see why when you listen to his share here today. And we're all here with Tim, Jeremy, and I'm Val, and we're going to be commenting and asking questions to Kevin about his experiences. So welcome, Kevin.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in my physical level street recreated. What I find in such real side experiences is very often individuals or beings that are to possibly come into my personal self-physical experience, or situations that may make themselves known on the physical, and although perhaps not necessarily directly in my experience, but in the experience overall of humanity that I am still a part of, will first venture into or feature in my recreated street on the real side. A representation then of individuals approaching me, or situations featuring first on the real side, but in my street that contains the personal self representing recreated house, suggesting then the engaging with beings or situations on the real side, and what is decided or agreed with, or that which I am shown, will more likely become so on the physical level. For many times we will interact and encounter individuals on the real side wherever it is we do, or we are shown certain views, but there is no guarantee that what takes place on the real side will be so on the physical, as we can be dealing more so with the real awareness, and not always will the personal self of the individuals follow through with agreement on the physical. And so, those entering my street on the real side, where the personal self-house resides, does indicate a greater possibility of agreement extending through to the personal side, and whatever it is, be it individuals preparing to step up, or situations in whatever forms they may take, of it being so on the physical. For just as individuals will enter my street on the real side, and I have shared a number of real side experiences where my street is the setting, so will potential situations or events that may occur on the physical feature in my street also, again as an indication of the greater chance of it being so on the physical level. And so, in this real side experience, my street would be filled with individuals, and as we looked skyward, as we all had an anticipation of some impending event, so would spacecraft of various designs and types begin to manifest above us. Interestingly, I have had this experience throughout my current lifetime on the real side since I was a child. of being in my street, of looking skyward and seeing these spacecraft, and they always were of the same type and design, as though even back then and throughout the years, as though this, what I would have referred to as a dream before being introduced to the real side as a reference, was a consistent future view, and something that was always intended by those involved, the spacecraft pilots, to be so, with everything based on agreement and decision. When we have these real side views, we are seeing the culmination, the effect of what is being decided at the moment we are afforded the experience. As in the isness, nowness views, everything is as it is currently decided and agreed upon in creation, and that they are future views is simply that what is being decided now must play out in cause and effect physical simulation, in what we call time and sequences of events. And of course, decisions and agreements can fluctuate, and so the views we have on the real side will automatically change in accordance, and the cause to effect sequence of creational events on the physical will alter as they lead to an altogether different decided outcome. But as I said, this view has been consistent, and I would have the same future view several nights ago, with the exact same array of spacecraft as I always have seen, only with a greater addition of individuals in my street than before, which was in fact packed now with people, whereas previously it had always either just been myself or a light scattering of others, and on occasions, going back through the years, my parents, Gwen and Peter, present also, suggesting now the greater number of those that are prepared for such an event, or at least are open to it should it occur, as in this experience they all would be standing in eager anticipation, as opposed to being racked in fear and trepidation. Very likely the masses of humanity have been prepared on the real side as much as the guides are able, and then it depends on if it can filter through to the personal self. But even if not conscious of this preparation, it will have been received, and perhaps then the event, if it takes place, not so alarming for the personal self as anything familiar, that which has occurred on the unseen parts of life, will alleviate somewhat the shock that one would have for something completely unprepared for, and beyond the usual comfort established zones of the personal self. And it does seem recently there has been much by way of alien-orientated documentaries and themes on the television, and the notion being put into the consciousness is of impending disclosure regarding alien existence. Perhaps elements of the control system are preparing humanity for what is something out of their hands, and beyond their ability to prevent, for it does seem also there is an increasing divide between the interests of the dark force factions, and many are breaking ranks and deciding to step up. Or there is the possibility that in the light of an alien arrival that can't be prevented, that having prepared humanity for it through the television, that they can execute a faked invasion of their own. My impression was that in this experience, as it always has been throughout the years I've had it, that there was no sense of malevolence, of ill intent, and so this would be an alien arrival that would be beneficial to humanity, and very likely one that had been arranged and negotiated with the real guides, and so makes sense with life. Naturally, the controlling dark forces, if they launched their own faked version, it would be quite the opposite. Also, as it has always been, in all the times I've had this future view since childhood, that although only the smaller craft would fill the skies above my street, always I knew that a gigantic mothership soon would be arriving also. This knowing must have been from the real awareness that would have seen the entirety of the future view, even though the personal self only was ever shown the arrival of the smaller craft. I would never see the mothership in this recent experience either, but again had the impression of its impending arrival. But a new feature of this most recent version of this real side experience future view, in addition to the greater numbers of individuals in the street, were that portals were now manifesting also. And again, the portal theme has been a constant in recent real side experiences, that they will become apparent on the physical level, and accessible, and as a means of a possible relocation to other safe positions in creation, or for whatever beneficial purposes they may serve. And that the presence of these portals now coincided with this most recent of real side alien arrival views, suggested both were connected, and overall then represented something that was awareness beneficial and made sense with life, and had the backing of the real guides. And as I said, that it occurred in my street is for me the indication that as a decision and agreement currently stands, this is to be a physical level occurrence, and as it has generally been such a consistent real side view throughout my life, that this is a happening that has always been decided on, but agreement is the factor as to what, if anything, features in overall cause to effect experience. And in a real side experience I shared a month or so ago, it did seem as though there was a stalemate, as it were, of those in agreement to this alien arrival event and those opposed to it. But here in my street I saw no resistance to this alien arrival situation, the mothership or the portals from being so. And so, as things currently stand, this event is on, and the agreement is there that it can be so. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, which was in fact only a couple of days ago, and I quote, "We see these things coming along, and again, it's all free will every moment. It's not that we're dealing in prophecy here, but just simply preparing for whatever is to be decided. For years, I was with 2 other seers to prepare this, to get this going and get the agreement from Enlil and Enki, as we put the Queen of Orion in the Phantom Zone. So this is all being prepared and decided, and we will see what happens. And I encourage you to share this. It's a good update to share among the other experiences on the Great Witness show, as it's letting the people know. So we will see. I've seen the people panic, and then there are those, a few of us, that understand what's going on. It's going to take a lot with our little physical bodies, but we're going to be shown what's going on. It's all free will and what's going to happen next.
It's interesting. Yeah, we're doing the day the Earth stood still today. It's interesting you brought this up, and that we're doing this show movie review on the fellow that comes from outer space to warn the people, the alien fellow. And it's interesting also, and it's funny how people react to this kind of thing where you see them in the movies at least running all around, or getting in their cars, getting on the freeway, trying to go somewhere. Who knows where? There's no place to go. But it's a huge challenge to coordinate this, like how to get people to, so they don't get into this survival mode, which you see in this day the Earth stood still, where they bring up the tanks and artillery and everything, between that and giving them the opportunity to wake up to something, because immediately they switch to survival, and then they just block everything out. There's no chance of, in a way, waking them up, but then enough shock value to give them the opportunity to see something more. It's kind of a fragile area to, challenging to do that. Plus, aliens or portals, I mean, these are all things that are unfamiliar with a one-dimensional viewpoint that most people have. Plus their belief system you're dealing with. So it's a lot to coordinate all this, like with people's awareness, and how you're going to present this so that they don't go off the deep end, yet they kind of see a space where they can like make a decision to wake up to more, to take that step into the unknown. It's a huge challenge for the real guides and for us to do this. So that's why we have more of us here, the more angles we have to approach people, because each one of us has a different viewpoint, and the more viewpoints people have, the more maybe they can see from one of our viewpoints. We're using humor with the Jeopardy show we just started. We're using the books, we're using Kevin's experiences, Witness, the Great Witness. So there's so many things that we're using, Facebook groups, political, conspiracy stuff. Some people get through to us through the conspiracy, because they see what's going on here on the physical level. But thank you, Kevin. Anybody else that's here? Comment?
I wanted to say about the Facebook group, there's one that was just recently made by Duane. I think it was called Welcome Aliens. And then there was Dimension Dreams. These are all very good. They kind of give you a look in to see, what's really going on, especially with the Queen of Orion, her being put away. And that's actually on YouTube too. You can find where Duane and I think another individual, they talk about the actual event that took place because they were there.
It was Claudie, Claudie and Sandy. We're working with Duane with that, with contacting the Queen and giving her opportunity to do something for the whole galaxy, for whole creation. And Tim, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I think about these, whether we call them aliens or fellow beings. I wonder about their experiences, whether they are ready for the real guides to be in their life. They seem to have the idea that it makes sense to not do anything. I guess it's fear, but that they feel they'll be destroyed, whatever they consider their lives to be, just physical or what. It sure seems like for a lot of us, it takes a big shock or something powerful to happen to even be at the point where we even want to pay attention to anything but what we're dealing with in the physical. It seems like majority people, they have no thought that their dreams have any reality. They're just something that the brain is doing while they're asleep, and they wonder a little bit about certain things, but I don't know the experiences that the beings from space have, even if they have dreams. I don't know. But all I see is it seems like fear. They need somebody to be courageous and set an example for them to act.
Yes. And even Duane said, his personal self may get a little rattled when the aliens do come down. It's going to be like it's going to be different. So, but the key is the intent the person has. If you have that sincere intent for, to just be sincere about things in general, you'll get through. You'll have that focus to get through any chaos that happens. I see it that way. In other words, that intent, keep the intent and don't get like distracted with the phenomenon. Even here, aliens come physically, it's going to be a lot for people. But with that focus, you can get through anything. And even if you don't, even if the personal self gets destroyed, you still have that intent, you're carrying with you, with the real awareness that's connected, or is the real awareness, basically.
This real side experience would begin in my deceased grandmother's and grandfather's house, who were the parents of my mother before they went on to their next positions in life. Very often I find that I am in this recreated house of my deceased grandparents on the real side, and although generally we would construe a house as a representation of the personal self, in this case, it's as though the house is utilized as a meeting point, a place where I will be briefed before an experience or assignment, or debriefed right afterwards by the real guides or Duane. The reason for this house being chosen as the place for these guide meetings, I'm uncertain. Perhaps it's almost along the lines of disguise, a little like a safe house on the real side, where it may simply appear to represent what most houses do, the personal self of somebody, but actually it's like a secret meeting place. And any dark force folks passing by this house would not consider that it was being used for such, and then would not try eavesdrop the exchange taking place. Sometimes the guides interact with us at certain positions in life that require a degree of recognition and awareness to perceive that the dark forces lack, again to thwart the reptilians from being able to snoop in on the conversations. The only trouble with such a tactic is that the new friends also need that extra awareness and recognition if interactions occur within positions of life that demand such awareness to decipher, and as a result, the exchange can be fragmented, information lessened, and the message the guides wished to impart lost to a degree, or even entirely. This I have experienced frequently, as I recounted on a previous real side experience also, where the guide had to drop into a lesser position, as it were, that he could communicate with me better, and even then I didn't decode it all. So I would suggest this is why they use this recreated house, for yes, it's important to stretch our recognitional abilities, but not at the expense of vital information that is important to our process being perhaps lost. Hence the house, that anybody of any awareness ability could perceive, and indeed, were they to enter, be privy to the conversations taking place, as the house would sit then more on the personal side of the real side, and not the real awareness real side. But recently, the dark forces have become aware of this house, where I hold my occasional guide meetings, and on several occasions they have replicated the house, and even tried to replicate the guides, confuse me, and trick me into taplining agreements, etc. As such, I have the impression the guides have abandoned this house meeting idea now generally, and it's now often the case of my having to stretch my recognition in the chosen and selected areas for any exchanges of information with the guides. For in my grandmother's house, the guides also would take on the physical appearances of my grandparents, generally my grandfather, and with the impossible to duplicate isness standing real signatures the guides have. You just know when you are in the presence of one of the universal guides, regardless of the forms they take. My impression is that it is REBISAR, that assumes my grandfather's form, and he is a very no-nonsense guide, all business and focus. And of course then, the dark forces not only have attempted to replicate the house and deceive me, but take on the external appearances of my grandparents also. But they lack the telltale Witnisss guide signatures. But as Duane says, duplicated and replicated fake dark force guides, or the genuine articles, it doesn't really matter, as it's all about experience and the awareness that comes from that. Anyway, I would find myself in my grandfather's house, in the living room area. Sat across from me was an expensively attired, elderly man, and my impression was that I was engaging a dark force agent or character of some distinction, perhaps trying to glean his agreement and assistance for the galactic activities, etc. He would smoke very expensive cigars, and even though I never have been a smoker, when he offered me one, I felt it prudent to accept it as a psychological method of creating a rapport with one you seek agreement from. Mimicking another is the #1 method of rapport creating. You put them at ease, you make them more comfortable, as though assuring them that their behaviours and mannerisms must be acceptable, seeing as you are doing them also. Although moments later my grandparents would materialise in the room, and they would declare this attempted negotiation with this dark force agent a farce. This would stop me in my tracks. Could it be that I was involved in something untoward, and now being confronted by the real guides, in the forms of my grandparents, as they are inclined to do in this recreated house? But wait, they lacked the usual Witnisss sense about them, as I would scan them with my real awareness, realizing then that this whole situation was a ruse, a set-up, where I had assumed this dark force agent to be genuine in his intent to assist. But the whole idea was to put me into a consideration that I had betrayed the guides, and in would come the dark forces masquerading as the guides, to accuse me of this very thing, to have me take on this consideration, doubts and concerns as to my intent, etc. However, the dark force impostors must have realized that I had determined them to not be the guides they had attempted to mimic. This outraged them, and they would both produce razor-sharp blades and lunge at me. There surely was no doubt now that these were not the guides. The elderly dark force agent faded away, his work was done, and I suppose it wasn't his concern as to what transpired next, and I would spend the next several moments fending off my attackers. A few RealSide nights later, and a similar situation would occur. There I would be in my grandparents' house. There would be my grandfather, and there he would be shouting at me without cause or seeming provocation. That was the only scene really, but my real awareness determined again that it was a ruse by the dark forces. They were determined to have my personal self take on the notion that I had fallen out of favour with the guides, and the scene would switch, and there I would be in a classroom or other, as though receiving trainings in one of the real side UNUversities. There I would be sat with others, and my grandfather there yet again. Again, it was rather apparent that this was a mock-up of a real UNUversity, and my grandfather's form, that was usually assumed by a real guide, housed another dark force character, because my grandfather would be screaming at me about how the NUUU song was no longer the real connection, the new presentation was a fraud, etc., etc. The dark forces surely were being very persistent in their efforts to instill doubt into me. I would leave the classroom, and the scene would switch. Now I was sat at a long table with what seemed to be other Nufriends and Duane, but once again something was off. Duane lacked his usual isness realness, that unique signature, that sense about the guides that can't be duplicated. You either have that awareness or you don't. At this table, Duane was telling the new friends how they had achieved so much, but their efforts were found wanting, that they were cast aside and dismissed from their process of awareness as a result. I had the impression the new friends here were genuine, real intended individuals, although I couldn't identify them, and that this dark force replicated Duane was dashing their drive, disheartening and discouraging them in an effort to have them forfeit their journeys. And of course, if we take on the notion that we have failed, that the process of awareness is over, that somehow we have fallen out of favour with the guides, all these personal self-considerations, then this can in fact be decision to do just that, even though it isn't so. For of course, despite setbacks, mistakes, errors and misjudgments, the journeys are only over when we decide that they are, as everything stems from intent. The fake Duane would turn his attentions on me, and I would receive quite the character assassination. And yes, my personal self has its flaws, and its occasional quirky, unadmirable moments, but it's all about awareness and intent, and we just deal with the personal self, and always seek to refine it and align it better with its focus on the real purpose of his recognition. Throughout all of this real side experience, I remained relatively objective throughout. I wasn't buying into the obvious dark force efforts to dissuade me from my process, by having me take on notions of guilt, shame, failure, etc., through their fakery and fairly easy to see through performances and creations, although perhaps a few little concerns and doubts had wormed their way in, and usually As you entertain these personal self-attitudes, considerations, convictions, and assumptions, they build upon themselves, and you can find yourself more and more immersed in the bubble of the personal self if you don't let these ideas go, to the point where you can disconnect momentarily from the real awareness with its automatic protection and discernment, and then you're rather vulnerable with just your personal self. And you can be assured there's an opportunity for the dark forces to worm their way in, and one they surely won't miss. The scene switched again, and in came another version of Duane and Val, and at this point I had lost my real awareness standing, objectivity, and discernment, though it wasn't necessary to have it, as this Duane and Val behaved so very uncharacteristically, and in such a way that would make no sense with the focus and drive they have for their own processes of awareness, and with the galactic wake-up, etc. Nevertheless, while I was accused of this and that, I activated another technique that I utilize on occasion when I am overwhelmed on the real side, when I am unable to deal with the situation, either because I lacked the awareness or because I was more so in my personal awareness for whatever reason, so unable to access the protection and ability that is available through the real awareness. I will build a sort of cocoon around myself, almost shutting everything out, and somehow I am removed from everything on the real side, though still there, and vaguely aware of the situations occurring around me that had me elect to activate this defense mechanism. It's almost like I have created a little pocket dimension on the real side, where nothing can breach and reach me. Then I sit in an almost delightful, detached silence, with no thought or emotion. It isn't the new nowness of the real awareness that I sit in, as I am at such moments disconnected from my real awareness. More like, I would say, a kind of deep dark border position of the personal self, a nothing, like a nirvana state, beyond the mind and emotions, but still in creation. On such occasions there I will remain for what seems like forever, and very often until I wake up. On this occasion, however, it's as though someone were trying to get my attention, and their attention getting persistence would seep through my cocoon defense shield, and the sense was that this person was a genuine, real guide. So I slowly lowered my shields, as it were, but still somewhat out of sorts, and I would find myself on a street, the bustle of people everywhere. The guide, for his isness signature would prove that he was so, would lift me slowly to my feet, and rather walk me away, supporting my movement with an arm about my shoulders, from this street to a nearby building. This building I construed as a sort of a place of sanctuary or safety, and in the company of a real guide my safety was assured. There the experience ended, as I undoubtedly pulled myself back together in the safety of the guide's presence, as he would realise I was rather in a vulnerable place after all the real side shenanigans, how my focus had slipped, and I had rendered myself more vulnerable through my immersion into the personal self, as I stepped into the created reality of its doubts, concerns, and worries, and the guide must have felt it prudent to interject. A reminder then of how the guides always are close at hand, and do indeed watch over their own. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "That experience shows a lot there, and you're really going through it and seeing it, and it's necessary. It sharpens your awareness to identify these things, etc. And yes, we've all been through it. Harold and Joni have tried to disguise themselves as REBISAR and Paul many times. I remember one girl here a few years ago, Olga from Australia, and she had an experience with me, supposedly on the real side, that didn't come out too well, and she left. The dark forces are always disguising themselves, and people decide. I've seen so many people come and go, and they decide. And I've talked with people who have had certain experiences like this, with myself and others, and simply I tell them to look at it, and does it make sense? Even if you don't quite know, look at it, and does it make sense? And again, you have to investigate things a little bit to figure it out, and I do too. Many times I've opened myself up, and I'm fooled by people, but it comes around, it shows up. I'm not really concerned. Just like how you said in the beginning of the experience, how it doesn't really matter if it's the real guides or not. It does, but it doesn't. I like the challenge of confronting these people that try to fool us, and it doesn't matter if they look like REBISAR or whoever, and they can be the Clintons or Obamas or the Queen of England, it's all fine. Or they can disguise themselves, it doesn't matter. The thing is, all life is awareness, and with what's going on with the planet here, I'm more than happy to confront them and have talks with them to see if they will step up. One way or the other, it doesn't matter, but again, does the experience make sense? It's not a matter of how it's the dark side, and you want to escape from it, and don't want to deal with it. Well, you can do that, or you can try and make something out of it. It's always your choice. It's not about not wanting to go near these people, because these people are struggling too, and they themselves know a lot of others. Of course they do. The dark forces know everyone around the world. So get them to agree to make better choices, and so they can influence their friends too. If their friends don't get rid of them first, that's always the challenge too. Everybody has set up their situations. We are working through ours. There's still a lot to go.
I wanted to comment on the experience with certain individuals that's I've seen that numerous times, especially the guides, they like to take on the roles of family members, and sometimes those same family members will come, but they come with information that you could say is discouraging or something, and so you really have to look at the experience. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. The guides don't act like that, and this and that and whatever. And then even then, like other things that you're shown and they don't make sense, you know, just making sense of it. But it is a struggle with the personal self, of course, but realistically looking at it also. In that they're always trying to pull a quick one, So they're funny.
Yeah, and even if it is a real guide, they could have an attitude or do something funny, like they did with Duane at the pier there, or at the, when he was walking across the bridge, across the highway, and they're blocking his way, and he said, "Get the F out of here! Get the F out of my way!" You know, just testing even him, you know. And really, the guides are just guides anyway. They're not our masters, you know. I'd see this still coming in from lifetimes of like worshiping and prayer kind of idea. I mean, they're just guides, you know, they're just, it's really our relationship with this the focus. So they're just there to prompt us, to hassle us, you know, protect us, whatever, you know, their choice, but whatever they choose. And like you said, Kevin, you smoked a cigarette, you know, just to mimic their behavior. So what we're into, like the real guides, they can take on their forms and stuff like that to try to relate to us, to try to turn us. But it's interesting, this concept that Duane's bringing up, that we can turn them too. It's okay to confront these evil, the bad guys, and they're struggling too in their own way. And they can be, you know, encouraged to make better choices. And you don't really hear this out in the society or public or education or the systems. You don't really hear that, if at all, that these guys are struggling and they can be turned, and we're here for everybody, really. Ryan, any comments?
Long experience, and I interesting about how can he remember all of these. And as it's two parts interesting for me about like a fake real guides. I see it more than 10 times in my experience. I see a fake REBISAR came to me and speak to me, and he want to me to do something, or he introduced me a kind of energy. After 1 week or 2 weeks, we understand it's fake and it's about a reptilian. After 10 times, we recognize this fake real guys and these reptilians. When they come to me or my friends, and they recognize the real face of this creature and see the behind this hologram of the real guy, the one reptilian speak about it. And the second point is interesting for me about the old experience of the Kevin said about the reptilian, about the journey he has in the real side. After one of my experience in the real side, I see queen and reptilian and I speak with them. After the all 3 days attack me and punish me, and I go to in a bad mood. What can I do for this attack and to focus in the real side? Because maybe my dreams were very long. One night I dream it, maybe 2 weeks I cannot dream anything because of these attacks.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to bring that up too, Kevin, is like what you did. You said either you were in your personal self or lack of awareness. You get in these situations on the real side. What does a being do? So Reese is asking the same thing. And you built this cocoon idea. So can you kind of comment on that? What people can do when they're kind of in a position where they're spent, basically they're at their wit's end?
I mean, the only thing they can do to you is what you allow them to do to you, really. I mean, all the experiences that go on, regardless of what form they take, as abrasive or dark force orientated they may be. I mean, it's always our decision how we react to them, and it's through our choice of reaction as to how we are affected by them. Obviously, the ultimate expression of that would be then being completely indifferent to everything in creation. And if you are able to stand in that complete real awareness, indifference of your real awareness self, then it would just be like watching all your experiences as though you were simply watching a movie, and therefore none of it can actually impact you in a negative way, because you're not then. I mean, that is part of the dark forces controller's game. They want to alarm you and scare the personal self and have it react emotionally, because as soon as you do that, you are now out of your real awareness, now in this position which is beyond their reach, and now you have stepped into the personal self arena where they can impact and infringe upon it, and they can do that on the physical, obviously, and they will do it on the real side. And so that was more or less the example of the experience I just shared. I mean, all of that was designed to bring me into my personal self. And then had I remained in that personal self, then they could have probably escalated the attacks. They could have imposed upon me on the real side. And so all you can do in those situations, I mean, it's easier said than done, but you just have to learn to, regardless of the experiences you have, to always be indifferent to them. As I said, the moment you react with any emotion, regardless of what the emotion is, if it's through the personal self, you will be drawn into that personal self. You are now in the personal self arena, and the personal self arena and creation is basically the dominion of the reptilian controllers, because it's their designated and designed matrix. And so that's all that you can really do. It's always all about you. It's nothing to do with them or anybody else. It's simply to do with what you decide, what you agree with, and if you decide to activate your personal self and react with emotion or not. I don't know if there was another question in there.
About the agreement and choice and emotional things. When I connect the emotional portal for a reptilian, I lose my reality and real side, and they can play to me.
Yeah, that was another part of your question as well. You said about the remembering of real side experiences.
Oh, yes.
That was what it was as well. And again, it's the same thing. I have found that, again, the moment you activate your personal self or step into it, the less you remember your real side experiences. So it's almost a case of, for me, what I do is I've trained myself that when I first wake up in the morning, I'm very careful not to activate my personal self. In other words, when I wake up, I will stay in the nowness of my real awareness, and I won't activate any thoughts or emotions, because what a lot of people do is, as soon as they wake up, they start thinking, they start thinking about what they got to do today. They think about their breakfast and the things they got to do and such. And the moment you activate your personal self, you're now reducing your ability to remember your real side experiences. Duane described it on waking as like dropping a stone in a pond and the ripples obscure the clarity of the surface of the water, sort of thing. And so for me, my technique would be, as soon as you wake up, be very careful not to start thinking, not to use your personal self, just stay in your nowness state, and then that is the place where you're most likely to remember more of your real side experiences, because the moment you activate your personal self, you will automatically then start to forget what you were just experiencing. But I mean, for every experience I do remember in clarity, there are lots of experiences that I don't remember. I don't remember them all. I have experiences that are hazy, or I can't get a lot of details from, or that are so mixed up and convoluted that I can't draw anything from them or make any conclusions. So for every experience I do remember in clarity and in detail, there are also experiences that I don't, even though I will try and not activate my thought processes in the morning when I wake up, which would obscure my recollection. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah, so overall, the idea is, like Duane always says, to be now as much as possible. If you're always now, in your nowness state as much as possible, just being, without thinking or using your emotions, without having considerations or convictions or attitudes, if you're always now, then you will always be best protected on the real side, and you will also, that will be the best place where you will always remember your experiences. And also, even if you forget your experiences first thing in the morning, sometimes if you go into your now state during the day, you'll find sometimes the experiences will come back to you out of the blue. Suddenly you'll remember the experience. So just halfway through the day. So that's the key, really, is just to always be now as much as possible all the time. That's the best place to be.
May I ask some question about being now? How can I be in now? What about our plan in future? I can recognize them. For example, I wanted to change my work. So I learned that I shouldn't be worried about that. But is it true? I can recognize them. How? I should be a very easily person, and what happened, it's okay or not. I should do something real, something that is important for me. I can found the difference between them.
I mean, we'll always be making decisions with the personal self and in creation. It's not like we won't be utilizing the personal self, but the idea is that for the moments that we do utilize it, then for the moments that it doesn't make sense to use it, that we will then move immediately back to our new nowness position. Because I mean, we can't just sit in the nowness position all the time. We have to be utilizing the personal self for something.
Sorry.
We do have to create in creation, because that's the purpose for why we're here. So it's not like we just sit in our new nowness all the time. There will be occasions where we do create and make agreements and decisions through the personal self. But those decisions and agreements that we make through the personal self, ideally, we would endeavour that they make sense with life and be a benefit, awareness speaking. And so we wouldn't, for example, be wanting to use the personal self in a way that would be personal self-driven, and that wouldn't make sense with life. In other words, for example, chasing personal self-wants and thrills, that would only satiate the personal self's wants. But even if we do that, it's not like it's necessarily an issue, because as much as we can perhaps create unfavourable effects through what we decide through the personal self, as every moment is new, we can just as readily in the very next moment still step into the nowness of our real awareness, and so we would simply be conscious of the effects we're creating, and for everything we do create, even if it's not beneficial, you know, as long as we don't cling to it and agree with it and incorporate it into our personal self, then we won't be tap blind and resigned to the effects of it. So really, we can really, in essence, create whatever you want in creation, but that's not to say that then or beyond the effects of it, because that's the nature of the sim. It is cause and effect. Everything that you create will culminate in an effect you then have to experience, but the difference is that you walk through all these effects as though they're little bubbles floating in your personal self-experience, and as long as you don't cling to them or agree with them or carry them around with you, then they won't have lasting effects, and they won't represent then tap lines that resign you to future lifetimes. So it's not that Duane was saying that you don't create in creation, because that is part of the reason why we're here, because we need to obviously share and present the is, and we obviously have to create for that reason. And of course we then also have to generate experiences also that we can use for our continued comparisons to recognize the is by. So yeah, you would endeavor to do what makes sense and to do what's realistic. You got to maintain your personal self and support it. You know, I mean, if you need to get a job, for example, and it makes sense to do so, I mean, then do so. But the difference is you're always looking beyond those creations. You're not resigning yourself to them. They're always looking at the bigger picture and the ultimate objective, which is the real intent of your real awareness, which is to recognize the is. And so we shouldn't be over concerned with our creations. The only time we should be concerned with our creations is if we cling to them and can't let them go. This real side experience was brief and began on the real side, then transitioned into a very physical situation. The bulk of the real side experience was obscured to a great extent to my personal self, all just fleeting imagery and vague impressions that I couldn't get a lock onto and attempt to decipher. It was rather a busy situation, as though an overwhelming bombardment of activity, to the extent that it was perhaps too much for the personal self to figure out and unravel, like watching too many movies all at once, or overloading your computer with too much data and it shuts down and switches off. Only the final scene revealed itself, and perhaps only due to what was happening in it bleeding over onto the physical. For in the scene, on the real side, I seemed to be the recipient of some kind of operation. More impressions really, but the sense of being on a medical bed or other, in the company of other individuals, and something was then injected into the corner of my left eye, the corner closest to my nose. This had me snapping from the real side onto the physical and holding a hand to the eye that had been injected, because it was in pain consequently, and for a good hour or so before it abated. Interestingly, as this was going on, I experienced also a sensation in my left hand, as though my hand were going rigid, as though it were suddenly solidifying with an instant and extreme arthritis. But after an hour or so, my hand also returned to normality, as the pain in my eye also dissipated. I've experienced this sensation of my hands before, for on a few occasions, where I've been in certain areas on the real side, carrying out assignments, I have taken on this momentary affliction, though in this experience it was clearly the result of this curious operation. But the overall sense was that this wasn't an attack or an adverse situation I had found myself in through some agreement or other that had allowed it to take place, but more again a kind of a preparation for the physical body, perhaps modifications on the real side, that indeed filter then through to the physical, and perhaps will be of some benefit or other, for the pain experienced was only momentary and had no lasting effect, and I had experienced no additional effects since, for this experience was several months ago. In a few real side experiences I have recounted before, we were actually receiving injections by the real guides, and our body vehicles were transforming as a result into far more durable and efficient alternatives. On one occasion we took on body forms that had wings, as an example. This experience again was along similar lines, of the possibility being offered for better body types that are more resilient, less vulnerable, and able to survive better through that which we may have to subject them to in a deteriorating, polluted world, as we remain in it to do what is required. All such options subject to our agreement, and where the experience with the guides may not have literally suggested actual injections, more agreement that allowed such body alterations, but perhaps also are the possibility of very literal procedures that may even enhance the body, and again, for greater durability, for the stresses of the toxic world we are in. For yes, individuals are capable of effecting the physical from the real side, and far easier to undertake procedures this way than to set something up on the physical level, and as I said, I had no impression of ill intent with the ones administering this operation, and perhaps why a lot of the real side experience that preceded this last scene was obscured was so no other prying, awareness lacking, dark force eyes would be able to see what may have been a business taking place that the guides would not want them to be privy to. For if I had the awareness to see what was taking place, and the dark forces did not, but then I shared what had transpired, then the dark forces get to find out anyway, as they are always listening. So that is why much is obscured at times from our personal selves, even if we may have had the recognition and awareness to see it. Perhaps my personal self was bombarded by all that imagery for that reason, that the sensitive, and not for dark force eyes, activities were lost among the rest of the random scenes and overwhelming images, so I could not report that part of the experience, and only the final scene would I see. As I said at the beginning, I wasn't sure about sharing that, because as I can imagine, a lot of people might construe that in a funny way, as it seems to suggest injections, and even though that was not necessarily literally going to take place, as it was just for the personal self to relate to in the experience, people may get funny notions of these ideas of having the body enhanced. As I was saying, they might equate us with perhaps promoting transhumanism as an example. So I'm not sure about editing this one out for the final cut, but I'll see what I decide at the time. So unless any, don't know if anyone wants to make any comments. And hello, Pearce.
Hello, Kevin. You all right?
Yeah, Kevin, it's hard to relate to individuals who don't have the references, the real references, especially beyond the surface world, because what they see is how they're going to take it. It's not anything else, or not that it isn't anything else, but they can't see it any other way other than just what is there. It's not, like you said, it's not literally that people are going to get vaccinated by the guides or lined up or become whatever, you know, but if they hear it like that, then that's how they're going to put it together with the references that they have.
Yeah, because as I was saying, I mean, a lot of the experiences have suggested that the possibility of assuming these robotic vehicles, which will be for our benefit, so we'd have more resilient and robust body vehicles to survive the rigors of the pollution and the physical level as it sort of continues to deteriorate as it is. But again, people think that we're promoting again, transhumanism and becoming robots, which we're not. Because obviously the difference is the robot bodies, if we do agree and assume them, and they would be for our benefit to survive in a deteriorating physical world, but the difference is they wouldn't be controlled through by the dark forces. They would simply be body vehicles to experience creation in just as readily as any other. But again, people won't see it that way, so I may well just delete this experience off of this thing and not put it in the final cut. I'll think about it. But I don't know if anybody else wants to comment, because we're coming towards the end of the show, but we've got enough time for some final comments and such, or anybody wants to add anything or say anything.
I was just remembering that the real guide Paul Twitchell said that the longevity of the human body, that the real guides have the ability to control the enzymes, so that like REBISAR or Tomogishig or these beings keep their physical bodies for centuries, and it has to do with the enzymes. So if REBISAR or any of the real guides revealed to us what, maybe it's through the intake of what foods we eat or the water or whatever, that's an injection too into us in a way. It's just by what we have in our body and what we put in our body to control the longevity of it against the things that are being put out into our air, water, and food that are trying to destroy our physical bodies. So enzymes seem to be the key to the physical body's longevity. I also was just thinking about how, from the little amount of time I've been involved with the new presentation, how I've seen people, Chris and Claudia and Sandy and Bob and Kelsey and Henry and Eric and Lila and Solveig and Anton, and there's others. And they were called witnesses too. Claudia and Sandy and Bob and Sandy were trying to convince or influence Ekis going to the get together and telling them how that the new is the truth and everything. And then I think they were trying to convince themselves in a way, like Bob was constantly trying to tell everybody that there's a difference between thinking, it seems, and knowing. So it's very interesting how people that are called empaths or seers, what were they really doing? Was it just thinking, and they didn't know what was going on, and they changed all of a sudden from new to moo and trying to convince me that that's the new word or whatever you want to call it to use? And I don't know. Life hasn't revealed to me what they're up to now. I don't see anything about them hardly at all anymore. It is very interesting knowing compared to thinking. Whatever we think we know or whatever we know.
Yeah, Duane said the other day that when it comes to the real side experiences, well, you know, experiences are to a penny, as he put them, and it's not about the experience, as you said, Tim. It's about the recognition. And so, regardless of an individual being a great seer or having all these marvelous experiences, the REBISAR and such, when it comes down to it, did they get to a point where they started to recognise the ears? And if they don't, then eventually they'll just fall back to their personal selves and walk away. And as you said, we've seen it with all the examples you gave there. I mean, all those individuals had experiences. Chris Courage used to have a lot of experiences, Kelsey and Claudia and Sandy, with all the stuff that they did with the reptilians and the Queen of Orion. But as Duane said, for all of them, in the end, what it boiled down to is they simply didn't recognise the ears. And so it's almost as though you've got a sort of a smaller time window in which, if you don't recognise, or at least start to recognise something of it, it's almost like your personal self just pulls you back. And so, I mean, who can say how long that little window is for each person? But I think eventually, you know, the personal self just gets bored if it doesn't see it, and then you just it just pulls you back with all the thrills and such that it wants to constantly chase through creation. And yeah.
Also, intent. You need to have the intent as well, Kevin. I think that needs to be foremost. I think it is foremost. Real intent.
Real intent, as you said, is the real awareness and needs to be.
Yeah. But yeah, you have to recognise that. You have to recognise that you've got it. A lot of people don't even understand that they have it. They don't understand what it is. You know, talking to people and that about stuff, and they're blown away by this. Most people can't get their head around it. Some can, not many. Not out of course anyway. It's too much for most people. When you lay it out for them what it is proper, it's too much for them. But yeah, the ones that see it, it's all about, I think it's intent. As long as you've got the intent to do something, see it, recognise.
Yeah, and then you've got to get your personal self aligned as well for all the 5 bodies of it. And
well, yeah, most people don't even know about that. Most people don't even know they've got 5 bodies, you know. And you got to go through them all and get them all lined up so they all sing the same tune, and then that's it. And you know, I think it's a lot to do with your view as well. You know, like what Duane says. That's what I remember most. It's like it's bigger than the sky. If you take that view, I think a lot more will happen for you. But if you stay in that, because that's views, that's the view. You know, that's not a personal self view. That's encompassing of everything view. So if you're that view, you know, and a recognition that we are everything as well. You know, trying to break that down to people. People say, "Oh yeah, well, all life is one and all that." But yeah, but actually knowing it, start saying it, or recognizing it and knowing it in yourself. That's big as well. I think that's a major factor as well. That's my personal thoughts on it. Anyway, that's what I think. That's why I think it is. You got to know these things, and if you're not taught them, it's ideas, isn't it? You just get hanging on ideas, old ideas, new ideas, all distorted, mostly all distorted ideas. Agreed to. That's why it's all bollocks going down the way it is. But it is because it's all agreed to. Too many people just don't know what's real, and every day it's what references we have got to the true reality is being destroyed every single day, every minute. So what you can do is what you can do. Try and wake them up, but it's so hard. I'm sure we all know how hard it is to wait, to like talk to people about this, you know. And like, you got all these distractions everywhere, everything, jabs. I thought it was interesting, Kevin, a few months ago. I thought it was fantastic what he said about our DNA. You know, like the guys was working with a nano inside us to make it work for us. Yeah, I thought that was way cool. But yeah, I actually thought, you know, you could control your own DNA years ago before I got into the new. Like, you know, you make a decision and you just do it. You just decide it. Like Duane always says, you decide your life. You decide. Not no one else. You're the decision maker. So it's all, you know, all comes back to the individual, doesn't it? Everything. And that's my 3-piece for this afternoon. Thank you. Back to you, Kev.
I just thought I'd mention about these attacks that are happening to certain individuals. We have the right, it sounds like, to defend ourselves. And I had my experience on the real side where, whether it was myself or the real guides, but I didn't have any awareness of the real guides. So I bound the woman that I consider the influence, and I didn't treat her very nicely. And I don't think they want to mess with me anymore. They shouldn't be allowed to have any more power over us. So don't let them even attack you. Just bind them, and they'll have to deal with that they can't attack you anymore.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll do the new you. Okay, I'll start. New you. Tim.
New you.
Jeremy.
New you.
Ryan.
No, you.
Pearce.
You.
Kevin.
You.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks for sharing every week. Kevin's on Wednesdays at 12 Pacific time, and Sundays, normally we did it special at 9, but normally it's at 11 on Sundays Pacific time.